Finally, I get to think about how AI, especially with the recent advances in generative AI and generative models, how you could actually have a program that learns to generate music.
What fuels a multi-passionate life? I'm Jessica Wan, and in this podcast, I interview people who straddle two completely different worlds. I call them Ampersands, and we are collectively designing the Ampersand Manifesto. I'm delighted to be talking with Percy Liang, computer scientist and classical pianist. Percy is an associate professor of computer science at Stanford University. He got his bachelor's from MIT and Ph.D. from UC Berkeley. His research is on artificial intelligence, more specifically, foundation models that can generate text, images, and music. Percy has been playing piano since he was 8 years old. He's won several contests, including the Phoenix Young Musicians Competition, the MIT Concerto Competition, and KDFC's Classical Star Search. He enjoys giving both solo piano recitals and playing chamber music. Percy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jessica, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
When you think back to childhood, what were some early inklings that pointed toward a future life in computer science and music?
I started playing piano when I was 8, and at the time, I liked science and math and eventually started getting into programming. So the two, piano and computer science, started quickly becoming an integral part of my life. I would say that in the beginning, I got excited when I first started to learn because I was getting better. And then there was a slump. I changed teachers, moved around a bit. And then starting in 8th grade, I started getting more momentum. And since then, I've been really trying to keep up with piano. Up until just maybe a few years ago, I feel like I was improving. Of course, things get a little bit harder when you have, a full-time job and kids and so on. But I majored in computer science in undergrad. And at the time, I was also actively involved in music. I would say that obviously professionally, I'm a computer scientist. So in terms of actual number of hours, I spend a lot more time doing computer science. But piano has always been the integral part of my life.
How do you see piano and computer science connecting with each other or even helping you learn about the other thing?
Superficially, it looks like the two are very different parts of my life. I work on computer science and research, and then I go play piano. But there are some interesting connections that I've found throughout the years because it is one brain up here and that has to manage both of them. And one of the aspects is when I had a teacher about 10 years ago who really resonated with me. He was actually a scientist, but then he became a professional pianist and then a teacher. And I think there was this aspect of really architecting performance and thinking about the big picture, because often piano pieces, especially if they're technically challenging, to have just a lot of notes. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in how to play the individual notes. But thinking about the arc of the entire piece was something that I really learned from him. And this idea is actually very useful for my research, when I write papers, when I write programs, to think about the big picture and the essence of what you're trying to do. And so that's sort of an abstract connection. More recently, there's been a tighter connection. So for a while, I've always wanted to combine the two in some capacity, but never really got the chance due to life and other career things. But more recently, I've actually had two postdocs in my lab who were applying machine learning to music. And this has been actually really exciting because finally I get to think about how AI, especially with the recent advances in generative AI and generative models, how you could actually have a program that learns to generate music. There's actually sort of a personal reason for this, which I'll rewind a little bit. So in grad school, I was really interested in doing these piano competitions. I spent a lot of time away from research trying to prepare myself. And, I realized that I could never really compete with the people who are doing this full time. If you practiced 8 hours a day, I just can't afford that kind of time. But on the other hand, I felt like I had these ideas of how I wanted to express things, but I just didn't have the time to actually execute them. So I was looking to machine learning and AI as a way to extend or augment my capabilities in some way. And I haven't got there yet. So maybe one day I would love to be able to have some sort of way of figuring out how to express my musical ideas, but not have to. I mean, I know this sounds like, oh, I don't have to practice, but given the limited time, actually be able to create something with AI that I'm happy with.
This is absolutely fascinating. I think that we hear so much about AI being competitive with human work, the human creative aspect. But what you're really talking about is how AI could help you create more and create better. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So there's a long tradition of AI, which is artificial intelligence, versus IA, which is intelligence augmentation, which was something that the human-computer interaction community really embraced. And so these two communities really worked in parallel in some ways, where AI was focused on building these independent agents that could mimic human intelligence and operate independently. Whereas I tend to think a lot more about AI as IA, as tools that augment and help us as humans, because after all, we should be helping ourselves in humanity and society in some way. I think that for the piano aspect, this is really in some ways personal, because music is so, it's part of my expression, and any way I can use to augment and improve that, I would be very excited about.
What would a brilliant outcome look like? What would the augmented Percy be able to achieve?
So I have no immediate plans to do this, but I would say that I would still like to be able to play the piano. I mean, I could imagine people wanting to just have an alternative interface, for example, describe it in words or play something very simplified, but I do find joy in actually trying to execute. And there's a trade-off, I feel like, when I'm performing. It can be play with more abandon, and there's more energy and creativity and risk-taking, but you play raw notes, and sometimes you mess things up. But so often you have to pull back a little bit and keep your head on your shoulders and make sure that it's sort of coming out correctly. But maybe there's a way to have your cake and eat it too, if you have something that could fix the mistakes. We see these things in, auto tune, for example, for singing. But I think it goes beyond just fixing mistakes. I think these AIs could create new suggestions of things that you might not have thought about. I think these could teach us about how we might want to interpret things or express ideas, because the way that these AIs are built, they are exposed to such a vast array of different data and experiences that they could capture a lot more than any individual human. They, of course, doing it in its own limited alien way in some ways, but nonetheless, it could bring new ideas in. So ideally, I would like to learn. I would like to better myself in addition to creating more polished output.
We're going to share an excerpt from your recording of Franz Liszt's Piano Sonata in B minor. This is one of the most challenging pieces of piano music ever. It is 30 minutes straight. And there are so many theories about this sonata, ranging from it being a portrait of the Faust legend to certain biblical theories to just being artistic expression. Having worked on this piece extensively, how do you interpret it?
It's one of these pieces that you learn and then you come back to and then you play. And each time you come back, you see it in a slightly different light. And what attracted me to this piece is it has a few motifs in it. And these motifs get transformed over and over again. And you see them in different ways. And it's just a kind of a very coherent, cohesive piece of work. So it is interesting to see how Liszt was able to take a very simple motif, and transform it in all these different variations, lyrical, staccato, bold, gentle. And that sort of creativity is very, inspirational. And of course, it's a very monumental work, and it's extremely challenging, especially being able to play for 30 minutes without stopping. So every time I play through it, it feels like, there's a sort of a physical and emotional reaction after having gone through. It's a journey.
Now being a father of young children and having more life experience, how does the sonata resonate with you in this particular season of life?
I suppose one thing about raising children is that everything is constantly moving and changing. Just when you think that you've landed in a certain routine, things change. And it's very, capricious, unexpected. And a lot of this is reminiscent of, the Liszt sonata, where everything keeps on moving. It evolves over time. There are some things, refrains, where you come back to the same ideas, but sometimes it'll be in a different key and it will be slightly different. And it suggests that, life, raising children is always moving to a new place. It's never exactly in stasis.
Let's take a short break and pause for a moment of reflection. What in your life is moving to a new place? Outside of hosting this podcast, I partner with leaders in the workplace as they rise up. Perhaps you've gotten a promotion, landed a new role, or taken on a lot more responsibility, and you need a trusted sounding board to support you as you support your team. I coach individuals and leadership teams to rise to the challenge with my Ampersand blend of analytical and creative. If any of this intrigues you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. Now, back to the show. You have mentioned that you were really, really into competitions. You are currently working on learning all 24 Chopin etudes. It seems like this yearning for learning and achievement has kind of been with you throughout your life. How do you decide what that next thing is that you want to work towards?
For the last 20 years, I've consistently tried to set a goal of giving a recital. And I find that this is good because it allows me to share music with other people, but it also gives me a focus point. I need to learn a certain amount of music to be able to play and not embarrass myself. And so this has led to steady progress. And I think there is something really exciting and about growing when you're exposed to new music. Obviously, many of these pieces, like the sonata, you could play every day for the rest of life, and you'll see something new. But there's so much interesting and mesmerizing music out there, way more than any individual human can explore. So just trying to do as much of it, I think, is one of the driving factors. And for this latest project of learning the 24 etudes, I've played my first etude in high school, I think, the number 3, opus 10. And over time, I've learned more and more. And about 6 years ago, I decided, well, I'll set a goal of performing the first 12 of them. And I did that, which was in itself quite a heavy lift. And then so I decided that I would try to, I'm halfway there, I might as well continue. And so I'm working on it. It's through the pandemic and having kids, it's definitely a lot slower. And I'm not sure I would perform all 24. I don't know if the audience would want to sit through an hour of Chopin etudes, or whether my fingers would fall off at the end. But nonetheless, I will learn them, and maybe I'll record them.
Both piano and computer science are heavily finger reliant. And you've talked a little bit about how you keep your fingers in shape. How do you keep your fingers healthy, over a long period of years, decades of playing piano, and also as a computer scientist?
For piano, obviously, it's much more physically demanding. Like, you're pressing the keys, you're going around. And I've been fortunate enough, I think, in my career not to have serious wrist problems, knock on wood. There have been a few moments where I feel like I was at the cusp. Like, I was, typing a lot or playing a lot, where it would hurt a little bit. That was a sign I should probably hold back and try to give it some rest. There have also been times where it's not so much the wrist, but the actual fingers touching the keyboard over and over again, that they get fairly bruised up. And I remember once in a piano competition going in and playing my thing, and then I realized that I had blood on the piano. So I apologized profusely to the next contestant and tried to wipe it up as much as I could. Yeah, it could get fairly intense. I think actually more important is like the back and the shoulders. If you're into something, whether it be at a computer or in front of a piano, I sometimes forget about that I have a physical body until I'm reminded by when my shoulders start hurting. And that's something that requires, obviously, taking breaks, sometimes even going between different activities, sitting in front of a computer and then going to a piano and going back. They're both can be demanding, but they're maybe demanding in slightly different ways. And that can give some muscles or part of the brain a bit of a break while the other part is active.
What has fueled you to keep going as both a computer scientist and as a musician?
So for computer science, I'm an AI researcher. The idea of having computers that can think and reason and do various tasks that humans or usually in the human scope has always been kind of a dream. It's shocking how much progress there is in the field, and it's just very exciting. Part of it is the research and the ability to find new things and discover. On the music side, I feel like it's something that my body just needs in a way. So why do we sleep or eat or do exercise? It's rejuvenating, and it keeps me balanced. So there's that aspect of it. And for me, there's another aspect, which is I am curious about what you can do. So I play a lot of classical piano where the score is written, but there's so much interpretation. And if you listen to a Beethoven sonata by Richter or by Horowitz or Daniel Barenboim, they're all very different. And I think developing my own voice and figuring out what I want to say in this music, I find that very appealing. And I guess part of it is also related to the aspect of research. How do you say something genuinely new, right? Because everyone has played many of these pieces, but what can I bring to the table that's saying something fresh and new? And so in that way, that's a bit similar to the way I think about research.
What advice do you have for people who are pursuing or thinking of pursuing an ampersand lifestyle?
It's challenging, to be honest, to have two activities that you both love and want to keep up. And you often have to make trade-offs. But I think it's extremely rewarding. And I think from a practical perspective, I think the way to make it work is to figure out how to interleave them in a way, in sort of in time and in mental capacity, because they do tap into different aspects and they're complementary, which means that it's actually in some ways perhaps easier to do the two things compared to doing one thing but twice as much. For example, after a long day of doing research, I actually feel rejuvenated to go and practice. But if I were practicing all day long, I would probably not want to practice, or my fingers would tell me not to practice. So there's kind of gaps, I guess. It's in computer science you can call it pipelining, where there's overlapping in some way, because your body has the ability to multitask in a way.
What do you think should be in the Ampersand Manifesto?
There is a sense of self that I feel like I am me. And to the extent that all my activities stem from this single source of direction, I think makes it sort of easier in a way, right? So I don't think, even though playing classical piano and doing research are distinct activities for the most part, I feel like the motivation and the way that they fit together in my life is really synergistic. And I think maybe this is the thing that makes it work for me. It's not that I have two lives. I'm Jekyll and Hyde, and they're just like two voices in my head kind of running around. But it's really one me. And the one me sees both of these as contributing to my personal growth, my professional growth. And as I've mentioned, how the quest for novelty, the ability to see the big picture, there is a lot of ideas that get transferred over between the different skills. In machine learning, there's a notion of transfer learning, where you learn on one task, you train a model on one task, and it can help you on other tasks. And this is, I think, especially true of humans. But it's interesting from that vantage point to think of the role that music plays in computer science and vice versa.
I love this idea of transfer learning and thinking about the many sides of a human, feeding into the others. Percy, it has been fascinating talking with you today. Folks, you can check out Percy's work at cs.stanford.edu/P Liang. That's Pliang. If you liked this show, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow ampersands. I got a chance to reflect on my interview with Percy. There were so many nuggets of wisdom, so I'm going to try my best to distill down to my top 3. 1. This whole notion of AI versus IA was fascinating to me as a creative. There's so much talk today about ChatGPT replacing humans or tricking humans, but the way Percy is approaching his work is around how we realize our full potentials as humans to create. And how can AI be a support system for us to tap into our greater or most fullest ability? There's an aspect in here about the human experience of creation and how precious and irreplaceable that is. So is there a way that technology can actually help us get to the joy of creating faster? 2, Percy talked about pieces that you come back to over and over again and how they affect you in different life stages. I have felt this so much in my life, and not just with music I perform, but with the arts that I consume. One of my favorite movies is The Sound of Music. When I was a kid, I identified with Gretel. In my teenage years, I saw my struggles in Liesel. I am now fully in my Maria years, and maybe even identifying more and more with Mother Abbess. So yes, go climb every mountain. 3, this theme of one brain, one me came up several times in our conversation. Many of us ampersands use our two worlds to bolster the other. And even if externally they look like different worlds, internally they're driven by the same brain and the same person.
Sort of implicit in a lot of the framing is, well, I have my professional life, primarily a computer scientist, and I have this other life that keeps me sane. But in some ways, maybe that's not quite right. And in fact, it's a two-way street.